11th of May 1772. Josef Kirchhoffs, a wealthy and religious surgeon, climbs the gallows and prepares for a brutal death.
He's been found guilty of leading a ruthless bandit gang known as the Bockreiters, said to be in league with the devil. They've terrorized an area of the Dutch frontier for years.
Despite months of horrific torture, Kirchhoffs faces the noose, still denying any link to the notorious gang.
So is he a criminal mastermind who's been leading a double life, or a totally innocent man?
The celebrations that you can see going on all around me are in honour of some 18th century Dutch folk heroes, the Bockreiters. Bockreiter means billy goat rider, and there are images of them everywhere around here. So this is what the fuss is all about. This is a Bockreiter. Here he is on his billy goat, witch's hat on his head, carrying a firebrand, and about to ride off into a blood-red sky. Today, many people see the Bockreiters as anti-authority heroes, a Dutch version of England's legendary Robin Hood. But contemporary accounts describe them as a violent, sacrilegious gang of robbers who often targeted priests and churches. Matters came to a head in 1771 when local doctor Josef Kirchhoffs was arrested and accused of being the leader behind the whole thing. So which is it, Robin Hood-style heroes or devil-worshipping villains? One significant location in the Bockreiter story is the town of Herzogenrath. Today it's in Germany, but right next to the Dutch border. I'm here to meet Francois van Gehoekten, president of the society that wants to keep alive the memory of the Bockreiters. Francois, what made the Bockreiters so different, so much more terrifying than any other normal criminal gang?
They were accused of robberies and burglaries, etc., but they had to say that they have pledged an oath to the devil.
The robberies ranged over such a wide area that the story arose that the devil had given the bandits flying demon goats to ride. The ruthless efficiency of their attacks convinced both the authorities and the terrified population that they were controlled by a single, all-powerful leader. And that man was Josef Kirchhoffs. Francois, what does this church have to do with our central character, with Josef Kirchhoffs?
This is the Church of St. Mary, and he was here arrested on the 17th August of 1771.
That must have been quite shocking to be arrested as one emerges from church in front of everyone. Very humiliating.
Of course, it was about 100 yards from his house. Everyone knew him as a good man, and then suddenly he was like a criminal.
Tell me about Kirchhoffs. What do we know about him?
He was born here in 1724. He went into the army, and after 9 years he came back to his hometown, and he became here the official town surgeon of Herzogenrath. He married and had 6 children when he was arrested here at this church.
Why would they arrest him, of all people?
They thought that the devil came on earth to seduce poor people, weak people who couldn't read or write, like Bockreiters, but there must be a leader, a developed leader. And they thought then that must be Kirchhoffs. The belief of the prosecutors was that he was a man with 2 faces. He lived in the eyes of the people like a good Christian, but at night he was the leader of the gang, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Kirchhoffs' military training would certainly have been useful for a ruthless group of bandits, and he was named by more than one alleged gang member under torture. Was it a case of him leading a double life? Was he actually the elite leader of this gang? I think I'm going to send Joe off to look at the legal records, and I'm going to try and find out something about criminal gangs.
The story of Joseph Kirchhoff's and the Bockreiters is surrounded by myth and legend. Now, I want to try and cut through that, and I think probably the best way to do it is to look back at the official records. After all, surely you don't torture and execute a respectable man like Kirchhoff's without leaving some kind of a paper trail. The original legal records on Kirchhoff's and the Bockreiters are held in Maastricht, in a former church now home to the Limburg Historical Archives. Archivist Truus van Rooijroeks has been studying this crucial evidence. And if anyone can help me get to the bottom of this case and uncover the truth, it has to be her. When it comes to the Bockreiters, there are many tall tales. But what can we establish from the original documents? What sort of facts can we bring out?
These are the reports of the torture inflicted on people convicted as a gang member of the gang of thieves. They break an entry in other people's houses and churches and abbeys. The big question hanging over the Bockreiters, did they do what they were accused of having done? And the only confessions we have is extracted on the torture.
It's all a bit baffling. There are hundreds of trial documents here, but I haven't seen anything that proves Kirchhoff's was a criminal mastermind, only vague accusations clearly made under torture. And do any of these sources tell us about Joseph Kirchhoff's, the man himself, his character?
What we know about his character is a character reference from 1752, when he was still an army surgeon. He is described as not only a skillful surgeon, but as a very respected and very Christian person. People are amazed that he is arrested.
So it does seem a bit far-fetched, this very nice guy who was very true to his principles, a sort of devout Christian, would end up being part of these brutal gangs.
Yes. There was not one shred of physical evidence against him. Yeah. Only the fact that he was denounced in torture interrogations by others.
Clearly this comes down to the torture, doesn't it? Yes. You know, how can I find out more about the torture he suffered?
Well, the castle where the torture took place still exists, so you can see for yourself if you like.
That should give me a pretty good idea.
Oh yes, I think it will.
Truus and I have travelled 35 kilometres to the castle at Herzogenrath to find out more about the brutal torture inflicted on the alleged Bockreiters. Right, wow, look at this. How would these gruesome objects have been used?
They start with the thumb screws, first on one thumb, then on the other.
You said a thumb screw, I mean, this is like a hand screw, isn't it? It's
yes.
Even just by pressing gently, you can feel that
yes.
It would just be absolute agony.
And if that didn't make someone talk, they screwed on the Spanish boot.
So what does it do?
This is applied behind your calf, and this to the shin, and then with this handle it's screwed on, so it crushes your shin really. The third degree, there was they tied the hands behind the back, and then they hung you on a strapada.
By your hands?
By your hands, a feet off the floor. So you're hung by your own weight.
Is that even possible? I thought that would just break
yes.
your arms, would it not?
Yes.
It would.
Your organs rupture as well. It's not just the shoulder blades, but it's your entire inside gets torn up and torn apart. In some reports, people, after 5 minutes, they say, please screw me loose, screw it loose, I'll talk, I'll confess.
Dozens of alleged gang members were tortured here, and most quickly confessed. But not Kirchhoff's. He told his judges, "Gentlemen, you can tear my body to pieces. I have nothing to say." But was he sticking to a code of silence, or was he genuinely innocent?
Joseph Kirchhoff's was brutally tortured, yet he said nothing. Could he have been guilty all along and still held his tongue? To find out, I'm meeting Graham Johnson, who's been investigating today's crime lords and their gangs for a decade. Do members of gangs know who their leaders are?
Not always. The people on the fringes, the people who do the graft, the foot soldiers, they will not always know who they're working for.
The example we're looking at is of a guy called Josef Kirchhoffs, who's a respectable member of the community. Would someone of high status like that join a gang?
It's not unusual for high status people within the community to be leaders of the gang. For instance, the guy who does it now, round here, not many people know who he is. If you met him, you would not dream that he was involved in gang culture. Very respectable person, very well mannered, very educated, but he's in charge of a crime network with hundreds of members, which generates hundreds of millions of pounds for years. Drugs, fraud, guns, contract violence, that kind of thing.
So the most respectable member of the community could actually be involved in a criminal network?
Oh, definitely, yeah. These kind of rationally economic people who are born leaders, who have status to begin with, make the best gang leaders. And that doesn't matter whether you're based in Britain now or in Germany a couple of hundred years ago.
I came to Deptford thinking that Josef, a devout Christian, a family man, couldn't possibly have been the leader of a gang like the Bockreiters. But the gangs I've learned about today operate in the secrecy of their communities. If Josef was an exceptional man who could withstand torture, perhaps he could also be both a family man and the leader of a criminal network.
Despite the lack of conclusive evidence against Kirchhoffs, judges here at Herzogenrath certainly thought he was guilty. And after months of torture, his fate was sealed.
He is condemned to death, and his death sentence is read to him out loud in this room.
Right here?
Right here, yes.
Really?
He was sentenced to hanging on account of 9 burglaries. That was the best they could come up with after these sorts of tortures. 9 burglaries over a period of 9 years.
Hardly the record of a master criminal. And what do we know of his final moments?
Yes, they're documented, and I'll read them to you. Thus, they led Kirchhoffs outside to the Beckenberg, where the gallows was erected. At 11 a.m., the executioner put the noose around his neck. In a shaking voice, he calls out, "Jesus, for thee I live, Jesus, for thee I die."
So do you believe he could have been gang leader or even just gang member?
It's highly, highly unlikely that he had anything to do with it. There's no evidence whatsoever.
Kirchhoffs wasn't the only one to die. More than 350 so-called Bockreiters, both men and women, were either hanged, broken on the wheel, or burnt to death. Torture is central to this bloody tale. And of course the problem with torture is that it makes historical evidence really, really unreliable, because whether you're guilty or not, with enough of these implements on you and enough pain, you will confess. So it's fascinating that Josef Kirchhoffs never does. So although Susie makes a very compelling argument for him being a gang leader, a ringleader, I just don't buy it. For me, he was far more scapegoat than goat rider.